the secret army that controls the Pentagon's software. The night the Pentagon went dark. The map wall froze first, tracks stopped mid-flight, icons grayed out and the chat pane blinked. License expired. In a live war game, the vendor console demanded a credit refresh. Commanders watched their battlefield vanish behind a paywall. Phones lit up across 3 time zones. The readiness window was closing. A colonel slammed his fist. "We can't see, we can't move." Here's the twist. The private army wasn't carrying rifles. It was code, logistics, maintenance, and data, all locked behind corporate keys. One contract clause, one vendor server, a war plan held hostage. To understand why, we need to go back. How we outsourced the war machine. The Cold War ended with a victory lap and a spreadsheet. Washington wanted a peace dividend, and the military drew down. The mission didn't disappear, the people did. That's when the language changed. Buy services, not people. Outsourcing became a strategy, not a tool. Here, that's where the incentives bent. If you don't own the people, you eventually don't own the work. And then you don't own the knowledge, the tools, or the leverage. By the late 1990s, acquisition reform promised speed through the marketplace. Enter primes, Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop, General Dynamics, no longer just builders but architects. The government stopped specifying how to build and started specifying what to buy. Meanwhile, the rulebook grew. The Federal Acquisition Regulation and its defense supplements, a labyrinth of exceptions, waivers, and special authorities, made oversight its own profession. Complexity didn't block capture, it enabled it. If you knew the maze, you could design the exit. Then came the Rumsfeld-era transformation. The mantra was fast, joint, agile. The chart got leaner, the contractor footprint got heavier. Logistics, maintenance, base operations, networks. If it could be competed, it could be contracted. On paper, it was flexible capacity. In practice, it created permanent dependencies. The revolving door didn't just spin, it synchronized. Senior officials took badges off one day and swiped into boardrooms the next. Acquisition leaders rotated into industry, then back into government with a sharper sense of which clauses mattered. Not illegal, just aligned. Here's the quiet revolution, the lead systems integrator. Give a prime the job of stitching the whole system together. They would set the interfaces, the standards, the data formats. That meant they owned the architecture, the skeleton, and the nervous system. If you own the interfaces, you own the future. New components would have to play by your rules, through your gateways, under your licenses. The government still signed the checks. The contractor owned the map. Meanwhile, the battlefield went digital. Radios turned into apps. Missiles turned into algorithms. Aircraft became flying software bundles. The procurement machine kept buying platforms, but power shifted to code. Software isn't a one-time delivery, it's a relationship. Updates, patches, keys, data, each with a contract line and a clock. The sustainment tail got longer. Money moved from procurement to operations and support. The primes noticed. So did Wall Street. Inside the Pentagon, program offices learned to manage vendors, not technology. A new ritual took hold. Write requirements, host an industry day, evaluate proposals, then watch as the winner shapes the interfaces in their image. The language of control became data rights. Government purpose rights sounded strong, but the fine print mattered. If the prime asserted limited rights over critical technical data or restricted rights over software, the program couldn't modify code without permission. Not couldn't as in shouldn't. Couldn't as in the tools won't let you, the warranties void, and the cyber authorizations break. Meanwhile, oversight learned to measure compliance. Boxes got checked, cyber plans filed, configuration baselines approved, risk accepted. But the Government Accountability Office kept surfacing the same pattern. Weapon systems with trivial vulnerabilities, passwords set to password, red teams walking in through vendor portals. The roots weren't just technical, they were contractual. When vendors controlled the patch pipeline, security moved at corporate cadence, not mission need. Human moments told the story better than memos. A maintenance chief waiting on hold with a help desk to re-enable a locked diagnostic feature. A logistics captain told to stand down while a contractor rep flew in to plug a laptop into a vehicle the Army owned but couldn't touch. A squadron sortie rate throttled by a cloud service in another state. Each delay had a paper trail that looked rational. Put together, it looked like power. Congress didn't ignore it, it domesticated it. Jobs in districts, supplier networks across states, funding lines braided through committees. Every program became a political ecosystem. Bid protests turned into negotiation tools. Delay was leverage. If a contract award got challenged, months slipped, costs rose, urgency climbed, until the only risk anyone talked about was schedule, not dependence. The safest path became the familiar vendor, with the familiar interfaces and the familiar limits. And yet there was a promise in the beginning. Outsourcing would make the force more ready, more flexible, more modern. Sometimes it did. Private logistics could surge. Contractors could field specialists faster than the services could retrain. But the bill came later in sustainment. The cost didn't just rise, it calcified. Every year, the operating budget carried forward the licenses, the service agreements, the engineering change proposals, priced like ransom notes. What nobody emphasized at the time was the shift from ownership to access. The government paid to access capability it used to own. It paid again to maintain that access. And it paid a third time to regain any sliver of independence it lost. That's how dependence becomes the business model. This was the moment everything changed. Once primes owned the architecture, the software lock-in followed. And when software rules the weapon, whoever holds the code holds the key. The software lock-in nobody voted for. To see how fast the center of gravity shifted, follow a single missile battery. The launcher, radar, and command post used to be hardware stories, bolts, bearings, cables. Now the firing logic, the threat library, the friend or foe rules, all of it rides on code that the government pays for but doesn't fully control. The platform is steel. The weapon is software. And software lives on licenses, permissions, and a vendor's timetable. Proprietary interfaces sounded harmless. We'll integrate it for you. Closed software development kits were pitched as quality control. Withheld source code came wrapped in the phrase, protecting intellectual property. The effect was simple. If the government needed a tweak, say, to add a new radar mode or change an encryption routine, it couldn't. Not without a contract modification, a vendor sprint, and a delivery date that never aligned with the next deployment. The constraint wasn't physics, it was paperwork. People flagged it early. Auditors walked into labs and found weapon systems with default admin credentials. Red teams plugged thumb drives into maintenance ports and got shell access. A GAO team later wrote it plainly. The department was just beginning to grapple with the scale of vulnerabilities, and test teams were able to guess passwords like password. That wasn't because the engineers were reckless. It was because the patch pipeline was captive. Security fixes moved through corporate QA gates and legal reviews. Attackers didn't wait. Mission windows did. Sustainment contracts turned the screws. The initial buy got the headlines. The follow-on maintenance paid the dividends. Annual fees for patching, for cyber hardening, for data rights support. If the government wanted to run its own scanner or integrate a third-party tool, it hit a wall labeled restricted rights. Change the code without permission and warranties void. Break the configuration baseline and your authority to operate suspends. The risk manager signs off, but the risk is structured into the business model. Here's where the lock-in gets personal. A base commander stares at a grounded jet and a red banner in the maintenance system. Update pending, vendor review required. The squadron's mission depends on a patch that lives on a private cloud controlled by a contractor 2 states away. The help desk says it'll be 72 hours. Weather won't wait. Neither will the adversary's sortie cycle. The commander knows the airframe can fly. The software says it can't. The poster child is the F-35's logistics brain. First ALIS, then its promised fix, ODIN. The acronym changed. The dependency didn't. Mission data files, the DNA of what a pilot sees and how the jet reacts, are built in specialized labs. Who generates them matters. Who owns them matters more. If DoD needs a rapid reprogram for a new threat emitter, it still routes through a contractor pipeline with its own queue and its own uptime. Aircraft availability in practice can hinge on a server farm's mood. The same logic moved across fleets. Artillery fire control needed vendor keys to enable modes troops trained on. Radios required licensed waveforms and proprietary loaders. Even simple diagnostics hid behind dongles and passwords no soldier owned. Maintenance chiefs learned a new triage. Is this a wrench problem or a license problem? If it was the latter, the fix was a ticket number and a waiting room. Security took collateral damage. Vulnerabilities in supply chains don't start at the top. They seep in at sub-tier vendors with thin margins and thinner cyber hygiene. When a contractor's remote support portal becomes the easiest way into a network, attackers follow the trust path. After major intrusions in the wider tech world showed how a compromised vendor update can move like water, the defense world recognized its mirror image. But recognition didn't equal control. Patch cadence remained a negotiation, not a command. All of this wasn't debated on the House floor. Voters never weighed in on closed SDKs or government purpose rights versus unlimited rights. The lock-in came by clause, by interface control document, by commercial off-the-shelf promise that quietly redefined ownership as access. Program offices were told to move fast, accept mature solutions, keep to schedule. They did. The price tag wasn't just dollars, it was autonomy. And yet, the teams inside the building could see the alternative. If the government owned the interfaces, if it held the data rights to the core, vendors could compete at the edges without dictating the center. Instead, contracts normalized a different structure. Primes owned the connective tissue, and every new component paid tolls. That's how a force ends up with jets that need a help desk, ships with black boxes no sailor can open, and radios that won't talk until a licensed server nods. The irony is quiet but sharp. The military sought agility. It gained speed that belonged to someone else. The code that makes modern warfare possible now sets the terms of when it's possible, and nobody voted for that. The jet that needs a help desk, F-35. The promise was simple: move from ALIS to ODIN and the headaches go away. ALIS was the F-35's nervous system, tracking parts, predicting failures, pushing mission files, but it stumbled. Too heavy, too slow, too error-prone. ODIN arrived with a new name and a cloud-first pitch. The sticker on the box said modern. The wiring under the label still led to a vendor console. Pilots noticed the difference right where it mattered least. The menus looked cleaner. The dependencies didn't. Here's the part that decides what the jet actually is in combat: mission data files. They're the jet's threat library and its instincts. What to see, what to ignore, how to prioritize a radar ping. They're built in specialized reprogramming labs with classified tools. The files move across controlled pipes and into aircraft that can't safely fly a high-end mission without them. Who generates those files? Mostly contractor-led teams. Who can change them quickly when a new emitter shows up? The pipeline says the vendor touches the code. The squadron waits. Grounding risk sounds abstract until you watch a sortie evaporate. One pilot walked to the jet, strapped in, ran checks. The logistics brain flagged a replacement part as invalid. It was. Supply had the chain of custody, the form was stamped, the part met spec. But the system's database lagged the real world by a day. The jet's computer didn't care. The sortie scrubbed. The pilot climbed down. The mechanic stared at a red message and opened a ticket. Availability, once a wrench and hours equation, now depended on server uptime in a building the base didn't control. If the cloud that feeds ODIN hiccuped, if the pipeline that pushes mission data files queued too long, jets that were mechanically fine rolled back into shelters. Commanders developed a new weather, network weather. Ops briefings included it the way they included wind. Is the data up? Are the files current? Do we have the keys? Costs told their own story. Procurement made headlines. Sustainment wrote the checks. The original buy got you an airframe. Keeping it ready bought you access to updates, to patches, to the profiles that let a radar mode light up. Each cycle renewed the dependency. The curve bent upward. The leverage bent with it. When sustainment eclipses procurement, the gatekeeper isn't just the prime on the factory floor. It's the team that owns the software pipeline. Security rode in the same car. The F-35 is a flying network node with an attack surface measured in code paths. The pipeline that builds, tests, and delivers software is a supply chain in itself. Every tool, Every environment, every portal is a potential point of entry. When auditors warned that the department was just beginning to face the scale of vulnerabilities in weapons, they were pointing at this kind of complexity. The safest route is control over the build, but the build lived offsite. Patch cadence followed corporate calendars, export rules, and QA gates. Threats didn't. Pilot tells it straighter. One morning, his flight plan shifted for a pop-up tasking. New emitter in the area. The squadron needed a reprogrammed file to make sense of the air picture. The lab could do it, but not now. The slot was later in the week. He launched with yesterday's brain in a jet that could outfly anything nearby. He flew a sophisticated aircraft with yesterday's map of the world because the refresh lived behind someone else's schedule. Engineers aren't the villains here. The system they built solved real problems: parts tracking, predictive maintenance, configuration control. ALIS tried to be a logistics oracle. ODIN tried to be a slimmer, smarter version. The bind came from ownership. The government owned the planes. It rented the logic. When you rent the logic, you don't decide when the logic changes. Meanwhile, workarounds sprouted. Units mirrored data locally, cached the latest good configuration, built checklists to survive outages. They learned which error codes were lies and which ones would get someone killed. They kept laminated cards for what to do when the system says no. Sometimes they flew under waivers, with commanders signing risk acceptances that moved responsibility down the chain because the pipeline above them couldn't move fast enough. There's a human tax in all of this. Maintainers woke early to babysit uploads and fought for bandwidth on base networks. Pilots briefed two versions of a mission, the one with the new files and the one without, because they didn't trust the green checks until the jet screens confirmed it. Program managers sat between urgency and contract law, translating operational need into change requests priced in labor hours they couldn't audit. Everyone adapted. Nobody owned the clock. Here's the quiet irony. The F-35 was built to fuse, to be the aircraft that sees first and decides first. It is, but the deciding depends on a data river you don't command. When that river narrows, the jet becomes an expensive airframe waiting for a login. And on the ramp, a crew chief holds a handheld terminal, stares at a spinning icon, and says the line that shouldn't fit a fifth-generation fighter: "We're waiting on the help desk." A destroyer with a loading screen, Navy systems. On the pier in Norfolk, a destroyer's bridge hums with screens. The helmsman's wheel is smaller than you think. The real control sits in consoles that boot like laptops. A petty officer taps a menu to bring up the Aegis combat system. The cursor spins. A splash screen flashes the vendor's logo before the tactical picture loads. It's a warship with a loading bar. Aegis used to be hardware and code welded together by sailors and engineers who lived with it at sea. Now much of it lives behind Contractor black boxes. The displays look like Navy gear. The guts behave like proprietary appliances. When a radar mode throws an error, the message is check waveguide. It's called support. The tech manual points to a diagnostic that only the OEM tool can run. Sailors know where the panel is. They don't have the key. On literal combat ships, the promise was modularity. Swap mission packages, change the role, sail out ready for something new. The reality at sea was a cascade of passwords and dongles. To replace a failed module, crews followed procedures to the letter, then stopped at a login prompt that only a contractor could unlock. The ship could navigate, talk, self-defend, but the mission system waited on credentials the Navy didn't own. You can't solder a password. Maintenance turned into choreography. A bearing overheated. The engineering chief traced the fault, isolated the circuit, and needed the diagnostic to clear the alert. The software that cleared it required a license refreshed every quarter. The ship had sailed with a grace period. The counter hit 0 2 days into deployment. The work order went up the chain. Emails bounced between a fleet support center and a vendor help desk. A day turned into 2. The bearing got replaced. The alert stayed. The ship sat pierside waiting for a digital. Reset the crew could have done themselves if the tool wasn't locked. Meanwhile, the industrial control systems that move fuel, water, and power across the hull carry their own baggage. They're cousins of systems that run factories ashore, programmable logic controllers, HMIs, SCADA segments. They inherit the same vulnerabilities researchers publish every month: default credentials, weak segmentation, outdated firmware. Navy hardening teams push fixes. But where firmware is stamped, vendor only, the patch cadence follows a contractor calendar. The Sea doesn't schedule around compliance. In one port call, a cybersecurity team found a maintenance laptop with a vendor image and a remote support client set to auto-update. The vendor portal was a trusted path through the ship's defensive boundary. It was convenient. It was a hole. Red teams later admitted that when they tested shipboard networks, the easiest door wasn't a sailor's mistake. It was a vendor's default. Operationally, dependency shows up as hours that don't count. An exercise timeline ticks forward while a destroyer waits for a software token to validate the latest weapons doctrine file. The crew drills manual backups. They're sailors. They prepare. But the manual mode bypasses the fusion that modern naval combat assumes. You can fire without the full picture. It's just riskier, and commanders know it. Sustainment budgets bleed here too. The ship is funded. Keeping the ship's brains current is a separate line that grows with each software improvement. The Navy buys a hull and rents the smarts. Over time, the fees for access to diagnostics, for new threat libraries, for the right to modify technical orders stack like barnacles. You can scrape barnacles. You can't scrape clauses. There's a human moment that repeats. A bosun's mate leans on a bulkhead waiting to cast off lines. The captain delays departure by 20 minutes because the integrated navigation suite is applying a patch that can't be paused. The tide window is tight. The patch finishes with a cheerful chime. The ship slips its moorings a notch late. Nobody writes a memo about it. Everyone feels the shape of the dependence. Even simple repairs get abstract. A valve actuator misbehaves. The part's in the storeroom. The chief can swap it in an hour. But the control software won't recognize the new serial without an OEM provisioning step. The provisioning script sits on a secure portal that requires a token refreshed ashore. Comms can reach back. The server is down for maintenance. The 1-hour fix becomes a 36-hour wait. The schedule blames weather. The crew knows it wasn't the sea. Sailors aren't passive in this. They hoard known good images, document workarounds, build their own checklists to survive brownouts and freezes. Some commands push for open interface standards so the Navy can swap components without renegotiating access. The pushback meets the same wall: legacy contracts, asserted data rights, risk-averse lawyers who warn that modifying software voids certifications. The path of least resistance circles back to the vendor. You can feel the culture shift on the bridge. The Combat Information Center is quieter, more deliberate, more screen than scope. It's powerful when it's up. When it isn't, a destroyer that can cross an ocean waits for a spinning icon to stop. The crew looks at the clock. The ocean doesn't care. The system does. And a warship, ready in every physical way, holds for a login. The Army's invisible contractors. Drive onto an Army logistics yard, and you'll see forklifts, pallets, and tablets in every hand. Those tablets run the Army's logistics brain, GCSS-Army. It tracks parts, fuel, serials, maintenance histories, the bloodstream of a brigade. It's also a doorway. Data migrations, report templates, even how a unit defines ready, often run through contractor-led teams that built the workflows and still hold the keys. Soldiers sign in. The console answers to a vendor calendar. In motor pools, Abrams and Bradleys line up under sun-faded tarps. A mechanic opens a panel, traces a fault, and stops at a password prompt for a diagnostic mode only the OEM can unlock. The machine belongs to the Army. The toolchain belongs to someone else. So field reps ride shotgun across the force, embedded like permanent guests, indispensable, expensive, and invisible on the org chart. When a turbine controller glitches, the fix isn't a wrench first. It's a phone call. MRAPs tell the same story. They were rushed to theater to defeat IEDs, and they saved lives. They also arrived with sustainment packages that assumed a contractor in the loop. Reset depots learned to triage. What can soldiers do? What requires vendor sign-off? What voids warranties? A battalion commander once summed it up bluntly: I own the truck, but I rent the OK. The rent is time. Then there are the unmanned systems. A small UAV looks simple: a hand launch, a a catapult, a tablet for a ground control station. Behind that screen sits a stack of software that touches licensing servers, encryption key material, and update portals the unit doesn't control. If a key rolls and the push doesn't arrive, the birds don't fly. The air is clear. The sky is closed. Here's a day that repeats across training areas. A convoy stages at dawn, fuel, water, comms checks. A young lieutenant does the math on drive time and windows to make the range slot. One handheld radio-filled device refuses to load the new crypto because the image on it drifted out of compliance with the vendor's loader. The fix is a re-image. The only dongle that can do it is with a contractor 2 hours away. Range control won't hold the lane. The convoy sits for 48 hours. The schedule lists weather. The platoon knows it was a missing cable and a locked tool. Readiness metrics bend around these moments. Units report availability by definitions that grew out of what the system can see. If GCSS-Army says a part is in transit, a vehicle looks better on paper than it is in the bay. If a platform fails because a license expired, some dashboards treat that as awaiting admin action, not a deadlined asset. When contractors design the reporting schema, the numbers can be technically true and operationally off. Leaders fight to correct it. The database argues back. Meanwhile, soldiers adapt. They cache known good images, keep cold kits of spares with serials they trust, and map which portals go dark on weekends. Some units build shadow playbooks, who to call, which rep will answer, how to beg a token refresh from a help desk in another time zone. None of it shows up on a training schedule. All of it shapes whether a unit moves on time. Cyber rides along. Those tablets and portals form a supply chain of trust the Army doesn't fully own. A vendor's remote support client on a maintenance laptop can be the softest spot in a hardened network. Red teams say the quiet part. We got in through a vendor portal. Patch windows don't sync with mission windows. A brigade G6 knows an update closes a hole. The vendor says Thursday. The rotation starts Tuesday. The culture shifts one help ticket at a time. Company X sends a rep to fix what a staff sergeant wasn't allowed to touch in uniform last year. He retired. He came back with a new badge and the same toolbox, now authorized to run the diagnostic he used to be blocked from. He solves the problem in 20 minutes and leaves behind a lesson nobody wanted to learn. Authority travels with the contract, not the competence. None of this looks dramatic from above. It's 1,000 small weights, 1,000 small permissions. The Army trains to operate under fire. Increasingly, it also trains to operate under license. And the invisible contractors, on bases, on phones, in code, decide how fast the force can move. The supply chain that can stop a war. Follow the trail from a grounded jet or a delayed convoy, and you'll hit the same choke points. Parts nobody else makes, processes nobody else can certify, and contracts that turn scarcity into leverage. Hardware looks solid until you look upstream. Then it's sand. Start with Microelectronics. A guidance unit the size of a coin holds chips from fabs on the other side of the world. Those chips rely on rare earth elements mined in one region, refined in another, packaged in a third. If any link hiccups, a plant outage, an export restriction, a quality scare, the line stops. The unit on the flight line doesn't care about geopolitics. It just won't power on. Turbine blades tell their own quiet story. The alloy mix, the cooling channels, the coatings, only a few shops in the world can make them at spec. A sole source clause isn't greed, sometimes it's physics, but physics becomes pricing power. The part is long lead. If a surge order hits, the clock starts at months, not weeks. A squadron chief can swap a module in hours. He can't conjure a blade nobody else casts. Obsolescence adds a second trap. A decades-old radio works fine in the field, but the commercial chip it rides on aged out of production 5 years ago. The vendor offers a redesign, new board, new certifications, new cost, or a life of type buy measured in pallets of components stored like heirlooms. Either way, the bill isn't just money. It's time that runs faster than training calendars and deployment windows. Then a shock hits. A pandemic shutters factories, chokes ports and scatters labor. A war in Europe grabs artillery shells by the million and turns out every line that can still pour hot steel. What looked like a global marketplace narrows to capacity you can't bend by will. Schedules expand. Inventory shrinks. Planners relearn the math. Just in time is a bet. In war, the house wins. Dive deeper and the picture gets noisier. The prime on the contract depends on a web of sub-tier suppliers. Machine shops with 20 people, plating outfits in small towns, software boutiques with 2 senior engineers, and a hero spreadsheet. They keep programs alive with craftsmanship and continuity. They also run on old servers, default passwords, and hope. The attack surface isn't a vault at a headquarters. It's a maintenance PC and a strip mall with remote desktop exposed to the internet because the owner needed to check jobs from home. Counterfeit and compromised components slip in through the same cracks. A batch of connectors looks right, stamps match, paperwork scans. Under load, a hairline flaw opens. Or a microcontroller from an unvetted broker carries undocumented behavior that only shows up under certain signals. Vetting takes time and tools some buyers don't have. Rules grow sharp, ban certain vendors, require disclosures, but enforcement downstream is a sieve. One bad lot can ripple through a fleet. Look at how clauses shape choices. A subcontractor asserts IP over a fixture design critical for alignment. The prime agrees it's cheaper than fighting now. Years later, when volumes need to double, nobody can stand up a second line without that drawing. The owner wants a premium. The program pays it or misses the window. What felt like a footnote becomes a governor on speed. A commander sees it on a map as red tags. A missile unit prepped for a Pacific exercise gets the word, surge loadouts. The depot can kit most of it, cables, housings, software loads, until a single inertial sensor hits a backorder. There's one approved source. The estimated ship date lands after the exercise. The workarounds start. Can we borrow from another unit, cannibalize training stocks, fly a team to the vendor to expedite? Every call burns hours. Every hour costs training runs. Meanwhile, auditors circle the other flank. Cyber. A supply chain intrusion doesn't need to compromise the prime. It can poison an update from a trusted small vendor. A code library used across multiple tools gets altered upstream. The change passes signatures and checks because the trust anchor is brittle. The patch flows into a diagnostic tool that flows into a maintenance laptop that touches a protected network. The breach isn't dramatic, it's patient and cheap. The government tries to push back. Policies demand onshoring, dual sourcing, and trusted foundry paths. They help when backed with money and time. They falter when legacy programs meet real constraints. You can't dual source a niche ally overnight. You can't requalify a critical component across thousands of pages of test data on a sprint. The right answer takes years. The need shows up Tuesday. There are bright spots. A depot rebuilds organic capability, trains welders on exotic metals, buys 5-axis mills, hires cyber staff to harden shop floors. A program office writes future contracts with teeth, open data rights, escrow designs, minimum onshore content, and incentives for second sources. Some primes partner with competitors to split risk and build redundancy. It looks expensive. It's cheaper than waiting. But the habit is hard to break. It's easier to sign the next modification with the same sole source than to pry open the stack. It's safer on paper to accept the risk you know than to bid for a new supplier and defend the schedule hit. So the force keeps moving with a hidden governor. Rare earths refined there, chips packaged here, blades cast by that single shop, code signed by one pipeline. It works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, a war plan meets a parts list. The revolving door, and the contract you can't refuse. Walk the earring and you'll see a pattern in nameplates. A program executive who shepherded $1 billion portfolio retires on Friday and joins a defense board on Monday. An industry VP takes a term appointment to serve, signs conflict of interest paperwork, and returns with a sharper read on who approves what. It isn't illegal, it's alignment. People carry relationships, muscle memory, and a mental map of which clauses shape power. Contracts start to look like autobiographies. Here's how that map turns into leverage. A solicitation drops with strong language about data rights and open interfaces. Industry reads the subtext. The government wants control. The bids arrive anyway, each with exceptions. A prime proposes a discount. on the condition that critical technical data stays under limited rights. They frame it as IP protection. The government, staring at schedule risk and budget ceilings, accepts a carve-out. One footnote later, the seed of lock-in is planted. Then come bid protests, the quiet weapon. You award to vendor A, vendor B files a protest. Work pauses. The calendar slips, costs accumulate, urgency rises, meetings multiply. The contracting team weighs a corrective action, tweaks evaluation criteria, reopens discussions. Months vanish. Everyone learns the lesson. Avoid protest magnets. The safest path becomes awarding to incumbents with established tooling, known interfaces, and a lawyered moat. The protest system exists to protect fairness. It also rewards delay as a tactic. Contract types hardwire incentives. Fixed price sounds tough. Industry eats overruns. On immature tech, it backfires. Bidders underprice to win, then fail fast, then beg relief. The government either terminates and loses years or renegotiates to cost-plus midstream. Cost-plus keeps programs alive but blurs accountability. Engineers bill hours. Complexity breeds more hours. Overruns persist because the path to done is a moving target controlled by the party paid to keep moving. The safest number is yesterday's estimate plus a cushion. Inside the clauses, the real battles hide. Government purpose rights versus unlimited rights isn't semantics. It decides who can modify, rehost, or recompete sustainment. IP escrow looks like a safety net until the trigger conditions make it vapor. Access only upon bankruptcy, not breach. Source delivered only if the government proves catastrophic failure. A bar so high it's useless in peacetime and too late in war. Technical orders reference proprietary test fixtures. Modify them and you void certification. Legal risk substitutes for technical risk. Lobbying drapes over all of it like camouflage. A major program touches suppliers in 45 states. Congressional delegations know the perils. When reformers push for open systems or second sources, letters arrive warning of job losses. Hearings focus on local impacts. A representative defends national security that sounds a lot like hometown security. The shield works. The old interfaces stay. The new clauses soften. Budgets keep the river flowing through the same gate. Here's a micro story. A colonel tries to require open mission data tooling so his team can generate files without a vendor's blessing. The draft gets traction. Then calendar invites expand. Industry council explains commercial derivatives and trade secret risk. The language gets walked back to good faith negotiation of rights. The colonel rotates to a new post. The program inherits a clause with teeth sanded down. By the time the jets need the files faster, the contract says the vendor owns the cadence. Delay becomes a negotiation, not a failure. A prime misses a milestone. The program has two levers: assess liquidated damages or modify scope. The first guarantees a fight. The second buys schedule with concessions, acceptance of restricted data, extended sustainment, or bundled services that edge out competitors. The spreadsheet looks better. The dependency deepens. Everyone calls it pragmatism. Meanwhile, acquisition officials live under the clock. They have tour to complete, slates to hit, promotions to chase. The metric that rescues careers is own the interface. It award on time. A clean milestone slides neatly into a performance brief. A principal delay to fix data rights reads like failure. People aren't corrupt, they're rational. The system pays them in schedule. Across town, general counsels sketch red lines that outlast leaders. When a program office asks for unlimited rights to core software, the corporate answer is standard: no. Offer government purpose rights with time limits or offer APIs without source. If pressed, threaten to walk. In sole source realities, walking isn't a bluff, it's a shutdown. The government blinks. Warfighters inherit a black box with a veneer of open. There's a parallel front: export controls. Companies invoke ITAR and EAR to block the government from sharing technical data across allied lines unless the contractor brokers it. The stated reason is compliance. The effect is leverage. Data portability becomes a paid service. Interoperability turns into branded theater, slides with open architecture badges while the SDK stays closed. You can feel the downstream cost. A cyber team finds a critical vulnerability and writes a fix. The prime says it violates the software baseline. The authority to operate rides on that baseline. The fix waits for a vendor patch cycle. The risk acceptance memo grows a tail. Everyone agrees security matters. Nobody owns the patch clock except the contractor. Still, there are cracks in the wall. A few contracting officers write clauses that force delivery of build pipelines, not just binaries. A service chief ties promotion credit to reclaiming organic capability. Some boards smell the shift and back openness to win the next decade. But the gravitational pull is strong. Revolving door expertise that knows how to sculpt clauses, protests that reward incumbency, contract types that cushion overruns, and a political map that treats dependencies as jobs. That's how a contract becomes something you can't refuse, not because someone threatens, because every incentive points to yes, and every yes writes another line that hands the keys to the code. Cyber on contractor time. While ships waited on patches and jets waited on mission files, another clock kept ticking, the adversary, S. GAO and DoD inspectors kept writing the same sentence different ways. Major systems carried basic vulnerabilities into the field, not theory, findings, default credentials, unsegmented networks, outdated libraries buried inside approved baselines. Teams could exploit them with tools you can download for free. The root wasn't only sloppy config, it was custody. Who owned the patch? Who owned the pipeline? Who owned the clock? On paper, the fix looked clean. The department rolled out frameworks, NIST 800-171 for protecting controlled data across the supply chain, then CMMC to certify that protection. Contractors mapped policies, printed procedures, checked compliance boxes. Auditors saw binders. Operators saw the lag, because compliance lived in documents, attacks lived in minutes. A unit found a critical vulnerability in a vendor component on Monday. The vendor cycle promised a fix on Friday. The mission launched Wednesday. Programs try to overlay zero-trust ideas, assume breach, verify constantly, limit lateral movement. But zero-trust isn't a slogan, it's plumbing. Identity, device posture, segmentation, continuous monitoring, automated response. When half the devices and most of the code belong to vendors, the plumbing stops at the contract boundary. You can see an anomaly. You can't touch the agent on the box that sees it best because it's vendor managed. Then came the supply chain intrusions that proved what red teams had hinted for years. A single compromised update from a trusted provider became a passport into thousands of networks. Corporate IT took the hit first. Defense learned the same shape exists in its world. A maintainer's toolkit, a code library embedded in Diagnostics, a remote support client on a vendor-imaged laptop. The trust anchor is the vendor certificate. If the upstream is poisoned, the signature is a rubber stamp. You inherit the breach. Inside test ranges, red teams stopped knocking. They walked in. A scenario repeated, a base network locked down, a mission system outside the enclave with a vendor tunnel for support. The tunnel bypassed controls by design. We got in through a vendor portal, one operator wrote after an exercise. Not bravado, frustration. Every extra door is a convenience in peacetime and a risk when someone jostles the handle. Patch cadence turned into a negotiation with physics. Mission windows land on calendars years out. Vulnerabilities don't care. A cyber cell begged to roll emergency updates across a fleet of systems before deployment. The vendor refused weekend work. The SLA didn't require it. By Monday, the window closed. The deployment sailed. The risk letter got longer. Everyone accepted it because the alternative meant voiding the authority to operate by changing the baseline without the prime. CMMC tried to change incentives with audits and penalties. It helped where companies invested. It didn't fix sub-tier realities. A parts shop with 20 employees can't afford a full-time cyber staff. They can meet paperwork and still run an ancient file server with RDP open because the owner needs remote access. Yet their drawings and machine code shape components that flow into classified programs. The top is secure, the bottom leaks. Meanwhile, the government pushed software factories, Kessel Run, Platform One, to bring modern DevSecOps inside the fence. Pipelines with signed artifacts, hardened containers, continuous scanning, speed plus assurance. They worked where they owned the code. They hit walls where legacy vendors guarded source with restricted rights and delivered binaries that couldn't be instrumented. A factory can't secure what it can't see. It can wrap it, monitor the edges, and hope. A micro moment lands in email. A squadron sysadmin watches an alert, a known exploit against a library used by the contractor's mission support tool. He drafts a block rule. The vendor warns it breaks support. The commander has a choice: accept a documented hole or accept operational risk by deviating from vendor guidance. He signs the risk. He adds a line to the night brief: avoid connecting the tool until the update posts. The jet still needs the tool. This was the quiet cost of contractor time. Security drifted behind mission because the control over change lived outside the unit. Inspectors kept writing, DoD is just beginning to grapple with the scale. Engineers kept fixing what they were allowed to touch. Operators kept flying with laminated workarounds. The adversary kept probing. And the clock kept serving the person who owned the patch. Boots for hire, the KBR/Blackwater playbook. While code and licenses tightened the screws, an older model showed how dependence becomes culture. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the private army wore polos and contractor badges. KBR ran the bases. Blackwater, later Z, then Constellis, guarded convoys and compounds. The idea was speed: outsource what the uniformed force couldn't surge. The result was a template: move core functions to contracts, then live on their timelines. Walk onto a forward operating base in 2006. The Chow Hall lights hum before dawn. The generators out back are KBR's responsibility. Fuel delivery, KBR. Water purification, KBR. The latrines, the laundry, the burn pit that smokes into the evening sky, KBR. Battalion commander writes a fragmentary order and adds a line that didn't exist in doctrine: coordinate with LOGCAP. Mission planning bent around a vendor schedule. On the roads, different rules applied. Blackwater's convoys rolled with armored SUVs and men who answered to a contract deliverable, not a chain of command. Their job was to move principals from point A to point B alive. Rules of engagement were translated into task performance metrics. If a firefight erupted, an army platoon leader and a contractor team leader could stand 20 yards apart with overlapping weapons fans and different authorities. Accountability blurred at the speed of gunfire. Contingency contracting made it possible. LOGCAP, the Army's logistics umbrella, was built for speed in crisis. You could put a life support city in the desert in weeks. Oversight tried to keep up, but waste, fraud, and abuse found the seams. Auditors later found shipping containers full of overpriced parts, invoices for meals never served, generators that ran empty to justify resupply. The war was hot. Paperwork cooled slowly. Burn pits became the quiet bill. With trash piling up and land scarce, contractors burned everything: plastic, food, medical waste, electronics, in open pits near living areas. The smoke crept through tents and across walkways. Years later, veterans developed respiratory illnesses they traced back to those fires. The contractor met the statement of work. The long-tail costs landed on soldiers, lungs, and the VA's roles. Commanders adapted. They planned operations around contractor capacity because the contractor ran the base. If the dining facility shifted hours, patrol schedules flexed. If the laundry contractor lost staff, hygiene routines changed. Resupply convoys moved when the security contractor could field guns. Military police enforced discipline inside the wire. Private security enforced movement outside it. The two worlds touched, shared radios, and disagreed about who owned a corner. A micro-story captures the habit. A platoon's MRAP throws a fault light on the way out the gate. The sergeant wants to press. The driver hesitates. The checklist says call the field service rep. The FOB has won, and he's asleep. The convoy commander kills the engine, radios up, and waits for a contractor to walk over with a laptop. 10 minutes become an hour. The mission clock slips. The sergeant stares at a green vehicle parked for a warning he can't clear. When the rep arrives, he toggles a setting in a menu the Army can't access. The light dies. The convoy rolls. Everyone learns who has the power of go. Incidents with Blackwater hardened the lesson. After shootings in Baghdad, investigations crashed into a maze of jurisdiction. Were contractors subject to US military law, Iraqi law, US federal law? The answers shifted with status of forces agreements and contract clauses. In the field, the message was simpler. Some actors operated under different consequences. That shapes behavior. Speed over oversight meant decisions that made sense in the moment calcified into structure. Emergency buys locked in vendors for years. Sole source justifications multiplied. When the wars matured and troop numbers fell, the contractor presence didn't vanish. It consolidated. The government had fewer soldiers trained to run base services because they hadn't done it in a decade. Outsourcing had replaced skill with invoices. And yet the contractors weren't villains. Many saved lives, repairing generators in firefights, driving into IED belts, feeding thousands under rockets. The critique isn't capability, it's control. When a war's basic functions live under performance work statements, commanders become customers. Customers with guns, yes, but customers waiting on service-level agreements. The cultural shift persisted. Younger officers grew up assuming a contractor for everything. Network outages, call the integrator. Comms crypto, call the key custodian's vendor. Heavy equipment repair, call the FSR. Over time, that reflex moved from tents and T-walls to hangars and server rooms. Today's battlefield is digital. The new mercenaries don't carry carbines. They write code, manage clouds, and hold the tokens. The playbook didn't change. The tools did. When the network is the weapon. JADC2 sounded like a promise. Connect every shooter to every sensor across every service, so decisions happen in seconds, not minutes. The vision was a live nervous system, a mesh where an Army radar could whisper to a Navy missile, and an Air Force jet could pass a target to a Marine battery without asking permission. Here's the catch. Those nerves run through data pipes mostly owned, instrumented, and governed by vendors. If the network is the weapon, the license is the safety. On a joint range in the desert, the choreography looked sharp on the whiteboard. An airborne early warning aircraft would spot a low flyer, push the track across a gateway, and cue a Patriot battery to practice a kill chain at distance. Radios were tuned. Links were up. The first message died at the seam. The format carried a vendor's private extension, a tiny field nobody outside their SDK could parse. The Patriot console showed a track with no identity, just a ghost. The fix was a converter the Army didn't own. The exercise paused while engineers argued over schemas. The target flew through the gap. Everyone in the room had heard open architecture. The slides were covered in it. But open turned out to mean published APIs that still required proprietary stacks. You could call the function. You couldn't move the data without the vendor's gateway. The logo changed. The path didn't. Interoperability became theater, a demo that worked because someone hard-coded a bridge 2 weeks prior. Try to replicate it in a new scenario, and the same handshake failed with a cheery error. Data portability fights got louder when allies showed up. Export controls mattered for real reasons, but primes used them like guardrails and gates. A partner nation would ask to run their own mission data tools or host a slice of the common picture on local cloud. The answer was no or yes at a premium, with the vendor brokering the exchange. The government didn't move bits, it purchased the right to move them. Then Silicon Valley arrived with new uniforms, hoodies, DevOps stickers, and a promise: cloud, AI, and mission platforms that could ride on commodity hardware and scale like commercial apps. They built fast. They showed commanders a tablet with live tracks, a chat that didn't crash, an algorithm that found a pattern humans missed. It felt like the future until it ran into the same gate. Legacy systems wouldn't share raw feeds. The startup asked for formats. The incumbent pointed to an interface control document, missing the fields that mattered. Here's a micro-story from a Pacific exercise. A Marine unit needed to pass sensor tracks from a small drone to a Navy ship. The drone vendor's feed spoke one dialect. The ship's combat system listened in another. A government integrator wrote a translator overnight, tested it, smiled. Morning came. The ship's vendor pushed a minor update that shifted a field length by 2 bytes. The translator crashed. The Marine stood on a beach with a working drone and no way to tell the ship what it saw. Radios crackled. Someone read coordinates by voice. The ship's weapons team typed them in by hand. The kill chain worked. 20 seconds became 3 minutes. Meanwhile, the platforms marketed as mission operating systems moved in slick UIs, drag-and-drop mission planning, AI-assisted targeting suggestions. They ran on clouds the government rented. They logged to analytics stacks the vendor owned. A colonel asked a simple question: who owns the models and the training data? The answer slid sideways: joint IP, derivative works, data use agreements. When he pressed for export to a government repository, the contract pointed to commercially sensitive algorithms. The product was speed, but the speed lived behind someone else's login. Security threaded through every decision. A vendor's orchestration layer sat in the middle of a kill web. It prioritized tracks, fused inputs, and decided what to discard. If that logic hiccuped, the web dimmed. If that logic got poisoned through a compromised update, a subtle model tweak, the web obeyed the poison. Red teams tried quiet flips: invert a friend or foe bit, degrade a confidence score under certain angles, add a millisecond of jitter to timestamps. When those changes moved through vendor-managed pipelines, the defenders couldn't see inside to verify. They could only measure weirdness at the edges. Commanders noticed the new kind of risk brief. Alongside weather, airspace, and comms, staff added license state, cross-domain guards, and cloud availability. What's our plan if the vendor's region fails? A major offered a workaround: pre-cached datasets on forward servers. The vendor warned about data staleness and revoked support if the cache drifted beyond a window. The unit accepted the risk. They also packed laminated cards for voice formats, because that's what never expires. Some programs pushed back. They wrote contracts that forced delivery of raw message schemas, required government-owned middleware, and mandated conformance tests run by independent labs. When a vendor tried to bundle a closed gateway, the government threatened to de-scope it and recompete the interface. It worked on greenfield efforts. On legacy fleets, the clause collided with decades of sunk cost and 1,000 tiny dependencies. You can't rip the spine out in the middle of a drill. The irony kept landing in small moments. An analyst watched an AI flag a pattern and wanted to tune it. The tool offered sliders, not code. A data engineer asked to export a week of raw telemetry to build a model. The portal offered aggregates and charts, not packets. A squadron intel chief requested the mission graph to audit how a target nomination formed. The vendor offered a PDF. Everyone agreed on the goal: decision advantage. But advantage lives where control sits. If the network is the weapon, owning the trigger means owning the formats, the pipelines, the models, and the keys. Until then, the kill chain moves as fast as a clause allows. The pushback: open systems and data rights. The first real pushback didn't start with speeches, it started with specs. Engineers and a few stubborn contracting officers wrote a different sentence into new buys: the government will own the interfaces. They called it MOSA, the Modular Open Systems Approach. Under it, components plug into standard slots with published, government-controlled definitions. If a radar dies, any conforming radar fits. If software changes, the interface holds steady. It sounds boring. It's power. Standards like SOSA and CMOSS took that idea and hammered it into hardware. In Army vehicles, CMOSS carves radios, U, and mission apps into cards that slide into a common backplane. In aircraft, SOSA defines how sensors, processors, and software talk so a new board doesn't force a new jet. The message to vendors is simple: bring your best box, but it will live in our rack, speak our dialect, and leave when something better arrives. Competition moves from lock-in to performance. The legal backbone is data rights. Unlimited rights mean the government can use, modify, and release technical data and software for any purpose. Government purpose rights are narrower, good for government use and competition inside the fence, with time limits. Restricted or limited rights lock the door. The new push insists on unlimited for core interfaces and government purpose for everything around them. Not to share with competitors blindly, but to preserve the option to recompete sustainment, build adapters, and fix vulnerabilities, without waiting for a vendor's blessing. Inside DoD, software factories put muscle on that skeleton. Kessel Run started by ripping out a broken air tasking app and rebuilding it with users at the keyboard. Platform 1 offered hardened containers, signed artifacts, and pipelines the government runs. VESBIN took mobile workflows that lived on vendor islands and brought them on base. The pattern is the same. Own the build, own the deploy, instrument the code, push fixes daily. Speed with visibility, not speed on vendor time. It isn't a miracle. The factories win when they write the code or when vendors agree to deliver source under the right rights. They stall when legacy programs ship binaries with look but don't touch licenses. A platform team can wrap a black box and monitor it. It can't harden what sits inside if the contract bans modification. So the reformers slip a new clause into recompetes, deliver source, and build scripts for the parts that matter. Some vendors balk. Others do the math and stay in, betting they'll still win on merit. Navy's Rapid Capabilities Office took the standards fight to sea. They ran bake-offs where multiple vendors built to government-owned middleware and message schemas. If your gear didn't pass conformance tests, it didn't board. In one trial, 2 radar processors swapped live in a day because the interface held. Sailors noticed that the paper promise, plug and play, wasn't theater anymore. It was maintenance you could actually do peerside. DIU, the Pentagon's experiment shop, tried a different angle. Buy outcomes, not brands, on short sprints with clear exit ramps. A unit would trial 3 vendors against the same open interfaces, then scale the one that fit. The exit ramp mattered. If a product stalled, the data stayed, the format stayed, the authority to replace didn't trigger a protest-proof mode. It didn't always work. Legacy systems still guarded their gateways. But where it did, the unit felt the difference in days, not years. A micro-story shows the gap closing. An electronic warfare team in Europe needed a new waveform tool to adapt to a signal they hadn't seen before. The old contract said vendor lab only. The new arrangement, built on CMOSS and government purpose rights, let the unit's techs load a government-owned plugin into a standard card, test it on a government pipeline, and push it to vehicles without breaking certification. 48 hours later, the gear heard what it had missed. No help desk, no waiver. A clause wrote that speed. Security got better when control moved in. With Platform 1 style pipelines, scanners flagged a vulnerable library at build, not after fielding. The patch rolled in hours because the team that owned the code owned the schedule. Zero Trust moved from slideware to actual gates because identity, device posture, and segmentation lived in government-run fabric, not vendor tunnels. When a vendor component still had to sit inside, the contract required attestation, SBOMs, reproducible builds, and a way to verify what was running. There were limits. MOSA isn't a wand. A standard can freeze innovation if it calcifies. Good programs bake in versioning and evolution so tomorrow's better idea fits without tearing down the house. And rights aren't free. Vendors invest in IP. They want return. The answer was give us everything. It was precise. The government owns what binds the system together, interfaces, schemas, orchestration, and gets government purpose rights to the rest so it can compete sustainment and fix holes. Vendors keep their secret sauce inside the module, where performance decides winners. Resistance showed up as familiar moves, an incumbent stapled open to a brochure while burying restricted rights in attachments. A prime rebranded a gateway as middleware and argued it wasn't part of the interface. A council warned that unlimited rights would chill innovation. Reformers countered with carrots and sticks. Evaluation credit for open conformance, award fee tied to delivering build pipelines, and hard disqualifiers for closing core interfaces. Some boards read the shift and leaned in, seeing profit in speed and portability rather than capture. Culture changed at the edges first. A contracting officer bragged, not about an on-time award, but about a repo URL where airmen could see code. A colonel put a MOSA conformance test on his readiness slide. A sailor swapped a failed card without calling anyone outside the lifelines and logged the fix, not a ticket. Small wins stacked. This is where the path bends. If the government owns the seams, it owns the system. If it owns the pipeline, it owns the clock. The pushback isn't loud. It's specific: clauses, tests, repos, keys. And quietly it's working, when leaders defend the rights, when engineers hold the standards, and when vendors compete on what they build, not what they can block. War game: a vendor holds the keys. The alert drops on a Friday night. Crisis in the Pacific, tempo rising fast. A joint task force scrambles for a surge order. More sorties, more missiles prepositioned, more data moving across the mesh. In the ops center, screens bloom with tracks. Then a quiet problem appears in a corner nobody planned to brief: a license banner. The Air Force needs updated mission data files to catch a new emitter pattern. The reprogramming lab can build them, but the distribution tool lives behind a contractor's feature flag. A clause added last year, meant to monetize advanced analytics, gates the file format the unit uses to push to jets. The contract renewal is in negotiations. The vendor's console shows feature unavailable. The squadron sees cannot deploy. The help desk says it'll escalate. Meanwhile, the Navy fires up an integrated fires play across the carrier group. A destroyer requests a software toggle to enable a doctrine variant tested months ago. The toggle is a configuration in a vendor-managed repository ashore. The replication job usually runs at 20. It's 210 now. The fleet wants it now. The vendor liaison says he'll try a manual push, but he needs a second approver in another time zone. The doctrine sits in limbo, while the air wing briefs a strike window. Across the Army's side, a Patriot battery preps a rapid march order. A batch of guidance units came back from depot. One fails self-test. The fault isn't hardware. It's a firmware signing key rolled last week. The provisioning server that recognizes the new key sits behind a VPN the unit doesn't own. The battery commander radios higher. We need a remote session. The session requires a token. The token is expired. Then the supply chain sneezes. A sub-tier shop that machines inertial sensor housings reports a ransomware event. They shut down to preserve evidence. Their small IT team calls a managed service. The line stops. The vendor tells the prime the estimate for clean images is 5 days. The prime calls the program office. The program office calls the JTF. Nobody can bend 5 days into tonight. Hill staffers call. Phones light up in the acquisition wing. A senator wants to know why jets can't get files and ships can't flip modes. Council reminds everyone that contract law doesn't care about surge orders. You can't compel work outside scope without compensation. The JTF commander stares at the clock, then at a waiver template. Workarounds appear. An Air Force captain proposes using last month's mission data files with a manual patch the squadron intel shop wrote in exercises. It works in test. The risk: it modifies a file outside the certified pipeline. The authority to operate depends on that pipeline. If someone signs, they own the deviation. The colonel looks at the line for voids vendor support and asks for the adversary's sortie cycle. He signs. On the ship, the destroyer's combat systems officer pulls an older doctrine file off a golden USB, one the crew keeps for outages. It's 2 versions back. It'll work, but it won't handle the exact tactic they planned. The captain adjusts. The carrier air wing changes ingress timing by 3 minutes. It feels small. It is. At the Patriot site, a field service rep on another base answers his phone and agrees to remote in through the vendor tunnel to provision the key. He needs the site's IP on an allow list. The allow list change sits with a corporate network team at home eating dinner. They promise 20 minutes. It takes 90. The launcher stays cold while trucks idle. A micro-argument erupts in a glass-walled room. The program manager wants to compel the vendor to flip the feature flag under a national security clause. Legal says the language is mushy, best efforts, not must. The vendor offers an interim, temporary access if the government accepts a liability waiver for data integrity. The PM signs the waiver. The files move. The caveat: if anything corrupts, support pauses. The ops floor hears, support pauses and shrugs. They've been living on pauses all week. A Across the mesh, a startup integrator that built the JTF's experimental mission platform offers to bridge the Navy and Air Force feeds with a converter they control. It passes quick tests. The Navy vendor warns that unapproved middleware violates certification. The JTF runs a split. One strike package uses the bridge, one sticks to the certified path. The bridge works. The certified path lags. A lieutenant writes down the times on a sticky note and slides it under his keyboard like a secret. The surge order slams headlong into clause reality. Export controls complicate allied sharing. A partner squadron can't load the same mission data files without a vendor-brokered key agreement. The commander asks for a carve-out. The vendor says yes, at a premium. The coalition flies anyway, half with last week's brains, half with today's. Debriefs feel like two wars happening at once. By midnight, the ops floor runs on caffeine and conditional verbs. If the feature flag holds, if the cache refresh sticks, if the vendor token renews. A major from the software factory suggests pulling the build pipeline on base and mirroring the vendor's repo into a government-run system to cut approvals. The contract forbids it. He swallows the sentence and writes a note for tomorrow's hearing. Dawn breaks, the strike launches. It's good enough, targets hit, timelines met, but nobody misses the friction. In the after-action, the first bullet isn't tactics, it's custody. The second is clauses. The third is a question: who owns go no-go in a software-defined fight? The answer hangs in the quiet that follows. Whoever holds the keys. Breaking the dependency, policy and practice. The after-action notes from the war game weren't new. They were sharper. So the fix can't be theory. It has to be clauses, tooling, training, and money pointed at the seam where control slips. Start before the award. Write solicitations that make data rights non-negotiable. The government owns core interfaces, schemas, orchestration logic, and builds scripts. Unlimited rights for the seams, government purpose rights for everything wrapped around them, with escrow that triggers on failure to perform, not bankruptcy fairy tales. No good faith negotiation later, locked in up front. Require deliverables that matter, not just binaries, source code, reproducible build pipelines, SBOMs, conformance tests, and the automated checks to prove them. If a vendor says commercial secret, fine, draw the line at the module boundary. Inside the module is yours to protect. At the boundary, you live in our standard under our rights. Tie award fees and past performance to open conformance and patch timeliness that matches mission tempo. If you control the clock, you get paid. If you don't, you don't. Sustainment needs muscle again. Fund organic depots to do modern work, not museum restoration. Secure toolchains, fixture fab, firmware flashing, cyber hardening at the shop floor. Train maintainers to run diagnostics without begging a license. Buy the provisioning tools and the certificates that unlock them, then hold the private keys in government HSMs. If a reset requires a phone call, that's a design flaw. Fix it at the next mod, not the next crisis. Build surge options into every stack. Dual source critical parts and certify alternates early. If physics forces a sole source, mitigate with government-owned drawings and process specs that let you stand up a second line at a different shop under your technical direction. Pre-negotiate wartime clauses that flip SLAs to 24/7 support, with liquidated damages measured in hours, not quarters. Make feature flags, illegal gates on safety and mission datasets. If a toggle can ground jets, it belongs to the government. Cyber can't wait on Thursdays. Mandate real-time patch SLAs measured against operational calendars, with carve-outs that allow emergency changes under a government-run continuous ATO. Move ATO from paperwork to pipeline. Attestation, automated tests, signed artifacts, and rollback plans that commanders can accept without killing certification. Treat vendor tunnels like explosives. Tightly controlled, least privilege, brokered through government zero-trust fabric, with session recording and just-in-time credentials that expire to dust. Supply chain risk management has to live below the primes. Fund assessments and hardening for the small shops that actually cut metal and write niche code. Subsidize MFA, EDR, and manage detection for sub-tier suppliers, as a condition of being in the program. Require SBOMs not just for software, but for programmable tooling, CNC post-processors, PLC ladder logic, so you know what logic runs the machines that shape the parts. When a ransomware hit lands, you should already have golden images, offline backups, and pre-cleared incident response playbooks that get lines turning in hours, not weeks. Onshore where it counts. Microelectronics at trusted fabs, magnetics and rare earth processing with allied partners and binding capacity agreements. Turbine components split across at least 2 certified facilities. Don't pretend you can rebuild a foundry overnight. Start now with volume guarantees and shared equipment buys that lower vendor risk in exchange for surge rights. Put real money on spare capacity, the insurance you hope looks wasteful until the day it is. Culture makes or breaks the clauses. Give career credit for clawing back control, promotion bullets for data rights won, interfaces opened, pipelines internalized. Train commanders in tech literacy so vendor managed reads like a risk, not a convenience. Put software engineers, cyber operators, and logisticians in the same room for readiness reviews so a green slide can't hide a red token. Make the person who signs the waiver sit next to the person who owns the repo. Then run drills, not just fires and floods, license expirations, vendor outages, corrupted updates, missing parts. Practice the cutover to government caches, the switch to manual doctrine, the use of second source spares. Bake MOSA conformance tests into pre-deployment checklists. If a system fails a government-owned test harness, it doesn't sail. No exceptions buried in emails. Legally, change the defaults. Update DFARS to presume government purpose rights for sustainment critical data and to bar clauses that make safety features subject to paywalls. Tighten protest timelines for interface-only disputes and give independent labs the authority to certify conformance so incumbents can't stall with performative objections. Write export control carve-outs that let the government share government-owned schemas with allies without asking a vendor's permission. Fund the software factories to scale. Platform one-style pipelines should be the default path to production for government-owned code and the wrapping layer around vendor components. Where legacy binaries remain, require instrumented shims that give SOCIs real telemetry and allow emergency policy pushes without busting support. If a vendor wants the contract, they integrate with the government fabric. Period. None of this is free. It costs time, lawyers, training, and gear. But dependency already has a price. Lost hours, scrubbed sorties, quiet risk letters. The trade is simple. Pay up front to own the seams and the clock, or keep paying later when the help desk answers. The next crisis will grade the decision in real time. The human cost and the quiet resistance. Start with a hanger at dusk. A maintainer kneels under an intake, gloves slick with hydraulic fluid, watching a spinning icon on a ruggedized laptop. He can replace the pump in 20 minutes. The system won't greenlight the install without a vendor script. The sortie slides. He texts his kid he'll miss bedtime again. The jet isn't broken. The permission is. Across the pier, a sonar tech stares at a blank diagnostic pane. The ocean's steady. The console is. A contractor will remote in first thing Monday. It's Saturday. Training windows are hours, not weekdays. The chief improvises a degraded mode and adds another note to the binder labeled, when it freezes. You feel the drain, not just on readiness, but on people who sign up to solve problems and get told to wait. Operators learn the tempo of lock-in in their bones. A pilot briefs a mission, then watches it scrub because a mission file didn't pass a clerk checksum. A captain shifts a fire plan because the latest doctrine toggle isn't replicated. None of it makes headlines. It makes habits. Start earlier, plan backups, carry laminated cards, apologize to families when 1 more hour becomes 4. The families absorb the drift. A spouse lines up childcare around a return time that keeps slipping for reasons that don't make sense outside the gate. A license expired, a portal down, a part provisioned on vendor time. Kids stop waiting at the window. Parents stop promising specifics. The deployments are official, the delays are constant. Tempo used to be a mission word. Now it's a household word. Some push back quietly. A program manager refuses to sign a mod that trades data rights for schedule, knowing it'll dent his metrics. He takes the ding. An EO tech builds a local test harness to catch vendor regressions before they fry a week. She shares it across units through back channels because the contract says vendor tool only. A depot lead retrains welders on materials the program outsourced years ago and fights to buy a 5-axis mill so a failed blade won't strand a squadron. He calls it buying time back. Whistleblowers aren't dramatic, they're tired. One sends a memo to an IG. The vendor tunnel is bypassing base security. He doesn't name names on social media. He documents, copies legal, and braces for the slow churn. Another logs patch lags that slip past stated SLAs and feeds them into an award fee review. She watches the score drop and the cadence improve. It's not a grandstand, it's leverage. Here's a micro story that repeats. A crew chief retires after 20 years of being told he can't touch the tool. 3 months later, he returns as a contractor with a badge that opens the same door. He runs the script, clears the fault, and tells the airman beside him, "You could have done that." The airman nods. The difference isn't skill, it's authority traveling on a purchase order. There are quiet wins. A small Navy team rips out a closed gateway on a testbed and replaces it with a government-owned stack built on SOSA. The swap takes a weekend. Monday's brief is short. It worked. An Army S4 writes contracts that require escrow on failure to perform, not bankruptcy, and uses it once. When a vendor misses a patch window before a rotation, the keys unlock. The patch lands. The unit goes. Culture shifts in inches. A squadron celebrates a repo link the way they used to celebrate a new jet. A ship's captain adds MOSA pass to the underway checklist. A brigade commander asks in plain language, who owns go no-go, and doesn't accept a logo as an answer. The dependence doesn't end in a speech. It erodes where people trade convenience for control, one clause, one tool, one rehearsal at a time. And then back to that maintainer. The icon stops spinning, the script runs, the jet's green. He wipes his hands, checks the clock, and thinks about the next freeze. He loves the work. He hates the wait. He starts a folder on his desktop, local fixes. Quiet resistance has a name. Who owns the next war? If contractors control the code, keys, and clocks, they don't just support the fight, they set its pace. Want the follow-up on the teams clawing back control from inside? Factories, standards, clauses that bite. Subscribe and watch the next episode right now. We're pulling the curtain on the engineers, rewriting the rules, and the gatekeepers trying to stop them.